Hello everyone. There was a video that was released from BSV blockchain on YouTube on September 4th, and I thought I would condense it to some key areas that I thought would be worth pointing out for you guys. So number one, the name of the video is called How Terranode Delivers Blockchain Scaling for Enterprise Use. There's some key people there. Number one, you're going to see this particular person who is Siggy Oskarsson, who is the head director of Terranode for BSV. And he mentioned specifically, as well as other people on that panel, he brings up interoperability. Now, I've gotten some requests in the past to do a proper compare and contrast for BSV and, of course, Quant. Now, as you guys know, I'm very bullish on both. I own both. But some people pointed out some key things in regards to the topic of interoperability. And I think it's very well worth pointing out for everyone out there that still thinks that QNT is especially just a ERC20 token. So let's jump into the outline. Consider sticking around to the end if you choose to do so, but there's chapters. But for this particular outline, try to have an open mind in regards to both. And I understand that some people may think that this is being tribalistic. It really isn't. This is not a FUD video. I don't do that. People can find plenty of FUD on other channels, that's for sure. So this is my own compare and contrast. Hopefully you have time to watch and listen. And again, like I mentioned, there is chapters. Smash that like if you haven't done so already. What we're going to do is simply jump into some key things in this video here in just a bit. And more importantly, how about this for size? This particular gentleman from Aerospike talking about how BSV through Terranode, can do over 100 million TPS. You know, shout out to Satoshi. He was talking about this when we did a collaboration, I think almost a year ago. So guess what? Here's my thing. We have been told that BSV can really do some big things. So let's just jump into it. I'll present this to you guys here in a bit. Some key things that matter to me and that matter to you. Let's play the video. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Siggy Oskarsson. I'm the director of the Terranode project. And we've been working for quite some time to realize this vision that you talked about, was scalable blockchain.
Let's dive right in. Siggy, as the person who's essentially behind the Terranode project and has been leading the charge for some time, could you please explain to us why Terranode and why is BSV building that? What's the essence of all of this?
Well, if as a business you want to do anything that's meaningful, we all talk about scale,
yeah,
right? The scale. So a blockchain is basically just a timestamp server. So you're going to be using that for something else. You're going to use it for your business needs. So you're building this business that's not directly a blockchain business, but a different type of business that uses the blockchain. So you need a blockchain that scales. And this was talked about in the beginning by Satoshi in 2009, 2010, about blockchain ending up in server farms and having it scale. And we're just working on realizing that vision. We're adhering to the Bitcoin protocol, so we're basically creating a UTXO-based Bitcoin protocol adhering blockchain, but that scales unboundedly. That's our vision.
Right. It's great that you mentioned the Bitcoin protocol. I want to let you bring it up, because of course we all know that in the crypto world, there's been a fork a few years ago. A brilliant young man, Mr. Buterin, Vitalik Buterin, came up with Ethereum and said, hey, one thing that Bitcoin can't really do is do DApps or decentralized apps, and you can't build a programmable platform on it, to be challenged, of course. And so he said, well, let's do something different. And ultimately, Ethereum now represents the proof of stake approach, which is obviously different from the original proof of work approach that Satoshi advocated and that the Bitcoin protocol is built on. So what's your take on that, particularly in terms of enterprise? As a corporate leader, you would look at it and say, proof of work, proof of stake, how does that impact me?
I think the adagium of proof of work can be found anywhere in business. If you're building a business, you're working very hard. You're doing the proof of work. You build a successful business. That's proof of work. The same thing is and you do that. You don't get anything given. You have to work for it. And I think that's the same thing in a blockchain. If you want an honest blockchain, you need to have that proof of work in there to make sure that all the participants are competing at a continuous pace and trying to outcompete each other and are trying to get better and better and better. In a proof of stake system, you have something akin to a monopoly situation more. You have parties that have a lot of coins, they stake them, and they earn more coins, so they're just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's very difficult for an incumbent to come in and challenge that. So the proof of stake system, in the long run, keeps the whole system honest.
So something like blockchain as a mathematically proven algorithm can come in to solve that complexity in the application layer and allow the banking system to scale unboundedly. So when I'm saying unboundedly, it's quite an important concept, because Aerospike can scale unboundedly, but the system on top of it should be able to use unbounded technology as well. So the thing that the guys built on the Terranode project, you possibly had the announcement that they are able to do 1 million transactions per second. This 1 million transactions per second generate around 3 million transactions per second on Aerospike database for storing the UTXOs. But 3 million transactions per second on a database is a very, very large number. But for us, it's actually quite tiny. We do have customers that do 300 million transactions per second. So yes, this guy's managed to achieve 1 million Bitcoin transactions per second, which is, I understand, is quite an achievement. But if they allocate enough resources, they should be able to do 100 million transactions per second, which is unheard of.
No, these are amazing numbers, and if you look at some of the other blockchains that are out there, and of course we don't want to get into the competitive discussion, but one of the issues is mempool clogging, and how do you deal with that, and all the standards. And I just want to come back to you on that, because we talked about this, your scaling, and the scaling of impressive, but why are you being able to do that? I mean, I don't want you to give away all your secrets, but there is something that you're doing around the offloading, isn't there, on the mainframe offloading? And why is that the key? Because in a certain sense, we need to have trust in these systems to know that there is something that we've unlocked that was possible to unlock. Like what's going on today with mainframe offloading versus how you are doing it. What's the difference with a normal NoSQL standard?
Well, as I said, these systems have had lots of features built into them that is built for enterprises.
Right.
But in the past, possibly 20 years, we tried to build our systems on a distributed set of hardware that is working independently of each other, like on AWS. And mainframes are not built for that. They're a specific set of hardware. So having a technology that can work on a distributed and independent pieces of hardware, I guess that's the core. So the database world is quite mature in that space. There are lots of databases that can allow you to do that, but I guess when you start talking about millions of transactions per second, efficiencies start to become very, very important.
Yeah.
So I think in Aerospike, we are very famous for having a very efficient platform, which is, of course, very fast. One thing about efficiency is that the only way that an application can run faster is by using fewer CPU cycles, and fewer CPU cycles means faster. So I guess all of these are going hand in hand, yeah.
Sure.
Can I maybe
yeah, sure, please.
add something to that? Because it's an interesting thing you said about the mempool clogging. So this is one of the things that we had to do in Terranode to make that go at 1 million transactions a second, is to remove that mempool idea. And I'd like actually to compare it to what we had in the past, is when people invented the motor car, right? The people that had horses, they were looking for a faster horse. And that's what it feels like in the blockchain space. We're trying to scale all these things up, but we're actually not looking at what we're doing. And mempool is one very important part of that. So what we try to do is dissect what is the thing actually doing. So we don't need all these things that you normally have in a blockchain, like in the rest of these clients. You have these mempool, you have orphan mempool, you have all these kind of things. Do you actually need them, or can you strip it down to something what is actually essential and redesign the whole thing? It's still processing transactions, it's still creating blocks, but it's doing it in a different way. So I'd like to say that something like another blockchain is the horse. We're actually creating a Formula One car. And Aerospike is the engine in that Formula One car. It needs to be very, very, very fast. And if somebody from another blockchain company goes talk to Aerospike, it's like, okay, how do I fit this brilliant engine into a horse? Well, you can't. There's no point, because the problem is not the engine. There's another problem. So we're creating something that's a completely different. It's a different way of thinking about how a blockchain actually should work. And that's why we can also dissect and get to the detailed levels and use something like a key value store like Aerospike to do the things that we actually need to do, and we just skip all the rest.
But another issue on the enterprise side, and those of us who've been in the space for 20, 30 years before blockchain came around, interoperability has always been an issue. We had the old discussion about monolithic systems versus what used to be called distributed systems, and then middleware and all of that. I mean, AWS has been in the middle of that. And today, when we talk about blockchain, and if you talk to a lot of tech leaders in the Web 2 space, or in the standard tech enterprise, as I call them, they would say, yeah, but how interoperable is all that? If I start on one blockchain and the whole company disappears tomorrow, as has happened, by the way, billion-dollar companies have disappeared overnight, how do I move all my applications and my data, and how do I move my real-time effect of that, right? So I think this is a great panel here. So C, I'm going to start with you. Interoperability, blockchain, Terranode, how do you see it?
I see it as, the analogy is actually when we started the internet revolution in the 90s, and you had all these companies pop up like AOL and World Online, all these companies, and then you had the AOL network.
Yeah.
You were locked down to your AOL network, and it was great. And I think that's the same thing here. We're looking at blockchain as we have all these different blockchains, we do different things, but like you say, today we have one internet. And I think this is the vision that we see, is that you need to have one blockchain. And that's why it needs to scale so massively. This 1 million DPS is just the start. We want to go further than that. But then you get rid of that complete interoperability thing, because it's in the business where the money should be made, not on the blockchain. The blockchain should be just a basic infrastructure, like TCP/IP on the internet, something. It's the basic protocol for running your business in an honest way and more efficiently. And I think that analogy is very, very good. And that we have 6,000 or 10,000, I don't know how many blockchains we have today, it's a disaster. And with the Terranode that we're working on now, we could run all the transactions of all the blockchains that are happening today with no problem at all. And that will completely get rid of the interoperability thing. But you still don't get that centralization. You still have that proof of work. So all the miners that are operating in that space will still have to compete like crazy, but they're just all working on the same protocol, just like the internet does.
Right. And I want to take you up on that. Like the internet is, or as it was, and now it's changing.
Yeah.
AWS, you've been powering a large part of the internet as it was. And now we're moving the blockchain space. It's a different approach. How do you figure interoperability will play into that?
I think interoperability, I mean, it certainly has a place currently. You have a lot of dedicated chains that are focusing on a specific purpose, and then you need to work on interoperating between other chains. It increases sort of complexities, potential security considerations, things like that, where, in my opinion, going with something that is a established and expandable base layer that is capable of handling all of these, and then specializing beyond it, opens it up a little bit more to provide those services, kind of like what Siggy was saying. Everything can kind of go there, but at the same time still be scalable and supportive of it. So we do support multiple chains and interoperability. We also kind of add that infrastructure layer that can be kind of a common denominator between multiple chains. So if I have a database that's shared between maybe different chains and how they're leveraging it, that's a space for it. But it solves a lot of the complexities that you get with the interoperability by having an expandable, sort of stable base layer.
Berat, when it comes to databases, interoperability has been the dinosaur in the room forever. Do we make it more efficient or do we make it more open? And there have been multiple approaches to that. And when it comes to doing 300 million transactions a second, obviously you have to make choices. We all know computer science is about optimization, right? Getting the design optimal, not perfect in one or the other, but optimal. So where do you see interoperability lying, and how do you think that powers the Terranode experience?
So I guess, again, going back to the issue of scalability, interoperability, somehow working to that, it reminds me of the projects that I was involved in around 2018, 2019. Lots of financial services companies had to implement open banking solutions. And so as we said, these banking systems that they have work on a mainframe. And you cannot open up your mainframe to the external world because your mainframe cannot handle the external world. So everybody started creating these basically secondary databases that hosted some of the data that was in the mainframe so people from outside can access. This was because the system, the internal system, wasn't as scalable. Again, right. The importance of a technology like Terranode that is scalable is that if you want to create something like open banking, you can just expand your system and anybody from outside can use the system that basically your core customers are using. Yeah. I guess that's the importance of scalability to interoperability.
Benjamin, do enterprises care about interoperability from an economic standpoint? Is it important in terms of when you are doing let's say a checklist of, hey, these are the blockchains I want to use? Is there an economic value to that beyond we understand the technical value of it?
I think there certainly is economic value. I think we are now in a phase where we can start to see that there are actually companies that are utilizing blockchains to create economic value. And I think the more we're moving into a Web3 direction and into the interconnectedness of everything, I think this will become more and more important. I don't know, coming back to interoperability from before, I was just thinking, there are always frictions, okay, if you create like this interoperability. I think you have to create a layer on top of another, layer on top of the other. I think there's also like, ideally everything runs on a layer that can handle everything and create a lot of data throughput, things like that. So there maybe I see the Terranode coming in because it has such a large, right? It can handle so many transactions. And then I can really see that people will start using smart contracts and just automated market makers, DeFi. Yeah. I mean, you can see a lot of applications. I think they're not quite there yet, but I'm quite positive that, yeah, sooner than later we will get to that stage.
All right, welcome back. So, something I want to point out basically is the gentleman from Aerospike. Now, why is that important? Well, I'm not going to do a super long deep dive about Aerospike, but on the surface, I want to take you over to this because, I think it's worth pointing out. So, number one, it's, they are doing some things. I mean, they really, really are. According to TrackXN, they had, at least in their latest funding round, $109 million as of April 4, 2024. But total funding in the last 5 rounds came up to be $171 million. They rank 8th among 148 active competitors. But basically, it's like this, kind of like what we saw in that video. It's understanding that when you hear companies like this state that they are wanting to scale, that need for scale, well, what am I talking about? Well, with the basic search, this is what stands out for me, and that is what's on the screen. Let's full screen this. Aerospike provides organizations with a real-time multi-model database that fits their needs, of course, to scale, manage cloud services, reduce costs. But are you aware that they have this whole thing that's designed for applications that cannot experience any downtime and require high read and write throughput? So you could pretty much say that they would never go with something like what? Well, Solana, right? That stands out. Another thing that really stood out for me was understanding that, you know, these companies that need real, true, scalable solutions, well, BSV does stand out. Terranode does stand out. And like you saw that gentleman mention, you know, they feel as though that it's just a matter of time, maybe even sooner than later, that BSV will do, like you said, 100 million TPS. Now, we had, of course, been there, done that. Reports of BSV doing through Terranode 9 million TPS. That's a big deal. And again, I remember doing videos last year about BSV 100,000 TPS. So to see this leap of hundreds of thousands of TPS, which let's face it, is going to get more than done, to jump over to, for example, 1 million TPS, 9 million TPS, and some of these goals that they're mentioning, I think is a big deal. Now, the other thing I want to point out real quick before we get more into some of the weeds of my own personal research is this. For some people that are stating that, high throughput, high millions of TPS is not really important, here's something I want you to think about. Have a blast from the past. So, I myself am an old school gamer. I still game when I get time. I work 3 jobs 7 days a week. I don't really have a lot of time to do it, but we all have to have a little recreational time. So, let's have a blast from the past, okay? So, the early 2000s, I remember when, for example, my local ISP, Internet Service Provider, through Cox Communications, that's what they're called, provided a package, for example, of only, like, was it 256 megabits per second? Okay, not even megabytes per second. And basically speaking, I mean, like, that was more than enough back then. Or, some of my friends had what they call 1 meg up, 1 meg down. All right, that was still a lot better than dial up. So back then, I remember people saying specifically, well, man, it'd be so cool to have like a T1 line, because with a T1 line, oh man, I'm going to have a great connection. And if anything, I need that extra data package. I need to be able to download all these files a lot quicker, whether it's music or whatever the case be, right? Back then there was like eBaum's World. There wasn't even YouTube yet. And as we know, YouTube was acquired, of course, by Google. The point I'm trying to make here is this. Understanding that even back 20 plus years ago, there was a narrative that this is all you need. Well, apply that to the future. If we're trying to get into Web3, whatever the case be, you might be a person in the East Coast, you have like Verizon. Remember how big of a deal it was that people had gig Ethernet, right? Now it's like pretty much the standard. Where I'm going with the whole thing is this: if we're truly trying to get to the levels of, Web 3, which we're in like Web 2.5 right now, well, you want to see projects prepare for the future at full-fledged, unbound scale. That's the point I'm trying to make. But as you saw in the examples, you heard, for example, the gentleman from Terranode specifically mention, doing these crazy amounts of TPS, but also talking about some of the banks. And then you also saw the other person from Aerospike talk about, well, we have a solution that in the future we can totally see some banks using. So that's what I want to jump into. And if anything, check out some of my own key findings. So number one thing I want to get into is this. I want you guys to understand that even with some of my recent deep dives, I talked about this thing called IBAN. It basically means it's an international bank account number. Okay. So IBAN is definitely used to identify bank accounts, process financial transactions, and of course, a lot of that is between institutions in different countries, as we know. IBANs have several purposes, like here's just a few that scratch the surface. They verify the identity of individuals, they recognize specific financial institutions, They verify transactions. That's one of the main key things that you should take away from this. So they verify, like, do we see the transaction details? Are they specifically correct? What about processing payments? IBANs facilitate what they call faster payment processing and, of course, reduce errors. So people feel as though, well, with ISO 222, that's going to play a whole thing. That's true. But the whole thing also is back to what we saw in the video. How can we provide a solution to reduce costs? Well, IBANs also help reduce costs of international money transfers by eliminating the need, of course, for intermediaries. Another thing to keep in mind is that IBANs are a standard practice. Again, back to that topic of standards, because you're going to hear more about it, especially from Gilbert Verdian. And those practices are in more than 70 countries, but in the United States and Canada, and as well as Australia, they don't use the system. Now, of course, we know that Dr. Craig Wright, he stands out as being Australian. Gilbert Verdian, Australian. I don't know, something about Australians, right? But bottom line is this: you can find IBAN on like bank statements, online trading, the IBAN registry, IBAN calculator tools, and so on. And a lot of people from Europe and so on, they're already used to it, basically speaking. So I want you guys to keep in mind, the bottom line is it's the process for financial transactions to happen basically between different countries, and for the most part, verifying what's going on with that. The next part I want to get into is, I said to myself, because I saw the video just like you guys did, I saw the full version, right? But I said to myself, there's only a few cryptocurrencies out there that use IBAN. And, for you guys that don't watch me on my quant videos and so on, well, recently I've been putting a lot of focus on IBAN specifically. And of course, you're more than welcome to look into that for yourself if you choose to do so. But I said to myself, like Ripple XRP has IBAN coded into it. We've seen use cases with Quant. Some of these other ones are ISOs. And it seems, though, it's clear that the central banks, of course, require IBAN. Well, with that said, I said to myself, since BSV will use Teranode for millions of transactions per second at scale, which I'm not complaining about that, amazing, right? How can Teranode solve the problem of not having IBAN, or does it already have IBAN? Fair enough question, right? Well, from what I gathered, the international bank account number, aka IBAN, is a standard format, of course, for bank account numbers used primarily in Europe, but is definitely designed to facilitate what is referred to as international payments and, of course, transfers. More importantly, as we know, while some cryptocurrencies have incorporated IBAN and its similar structures, they typically do so to integrate with existing banking systems. So, is that for compliance? Well, yeah. Will we see in the future, when BSV really takes off, that they would just put in a mechanism to be in compliance? Could very well be, but I thought I'd point out. But here's the thing. With Teranode, we know that that is a blockchain scaling solution designed, of course, to handle millions and maybe in the future hundreds of millions, or Satoshi has mentioned, billions, and who knows, maybe even trillions, which sounds crazy. It's like you get to the realm of it's moving faster than we can even fathom, But Teranode aims to do this type of scaling by introducing several innovations that basically include three things that caught my attention. Number one is parallel processing. Are you aware that Teranode can process multiple transactions, of course, simultaneously, but also while increasing throughput? Now, some people say, well, yeah, that's scaling, Max, I know that. But when we talk about proof of work, well, sometimes sharding with a D, not the funny one, gets mentioned in the mix. So that in itself divides the blockchain, of course, into smaller shards, but it allows each shard to process transactions, of course, independently, which also brings us to the next part, point 3, and that is optimized consensus. Now, I cover a lot of projects that, focus a lot on consensus, like some claim to be consensus algorithms and whatnot, but Teranode uses a modified consensus algorithm, and that is to ensure network security and, of course, efficiency. Where am I going with this? Well, keep in mind this. While IBAN is not a core feature of Teranode, well, like I mentioned, it's very well possible that the platform could be integrated with IBAN compatible systems or services. And this could be basically achieved with three key things. Number one, you better believe it, it's bridges. Yeah, if we're talking about cross-border payments and whatnot, bridges are going to get mentioned because why wouldn't they be mentioned? So building bridges between Teranode and traditional banking networks would of course allow user to transform funds between, of course, the two systems. What about partnerships? Well, that's something that stands out when it comes to some of these other projects that already established the partnerships like Ripple, Stellar, obviously Quant. But what about our beloved BSV? So collaborating with financial institutions or payment providers that support IBAN could very well facilitate the integration. And maybe it's not even that big of a deal moving forward, but something I thought I would point out. Because if we have a customized implementation, would we see Teranode develop its own, I don't know, IBAN-like system? It doesn't not necessarily even have to be called IBAN. It would just be a similar model. Would it be tailored to specific needs and requirements of its target market? I think so. But ultimately, whether Teranode will use IBAN or a similar system will, of course, depend on various factors. And that is number one, and it needs to be addressed, regulatory requirements. If the jurisdictions where Teranode is used require IBAN compliance, the platform will, of course, need to adapt. That's worth pointing out. About user demand. Well, I think in the future, even right now, we could all recognize what separates BSV from the pack. It's their tech. That's where I put my focus. I don't put my focus on the whole thing of, Craig Wright did this, Craig Wright said that, and so on. I mean, I recognize it. There's a lot of people covering it. Shout out to Gavin Mail. He's doing an excellent job with his coverage on that. I don't know if he's watching, but shout out to you, brother Gavin. But the point is this. With more user demand, wouldn't that create more institutional demand, especially when it comes to, wow, this technology separates itself from the pack? I think so. But why we could see more user demand, well, IBAN compatibility would be basically, let's face it, easier for integration with traditional financial systems. Teranode could very well prioritize that in the future. It might not even be that big of a deal, but I want people to understand that while there's complexity and cost of implementing IBAN or a similar system, well, that's going to put a lot of influence on the decision on moving forward if it's a necessity. So while IBAN is not a fundamental aspect, of course, of Teranode's design, the platform scalability and flexibility make it a possibility to integrate it, of course, into the system if it's necessary, which brings me to the next point. And that was, I said to myself, all right, maybe I talked too much about the whole thing of IBAN. But IBAN moves significantly slower than Teranode. So wouldn't this be counterintuitive? I mean, think about it. Or could IBAN basically be used to scale in itself to meet the performance of Teranode? That sounds bizarre, but I think these things need to be addressed. So yes, IBAN is designed for the traditional banking systems. And those two or three guys that were sitting on the panel kind of somewhat addressed some of these things without saying IBAN, because they mentioned the enterprise solutions and recognize what those older solutions are using. But from what I gathered, while IBAN has slower transaction speeds compared to blockchain-based solutions like Teranode, you have to keep in mind that the whole purpose of integrating with IBAN would be to match Teranode's speed, but to also bridge the gap between traditional financial world and, of course, the blockchain world. And that, of course, leads me to Quant. So would this allow users to basically easily transfer funds between the two systems? You can have the fastest thing in the world, but again, is it going to be counterproductive, counterintuitive? So while we understand that cryptocurrencies seem as though like some could be more accessible and usable for everyday transactions, IBAN cannot scale to meet the performance, of course, of Teranode. So it's like that might be a problem in the future. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, but I definitely wanted to point out. So the underlying infrastructure of the traditional banking systems is not simply like designed for the same level of throughput, but using a bridge or gateway, users can benefit from the speed and efficiency of course, Teranode. Back to what you saw earlier from Siggy. He was talking about that maybe your bridge is what you have to offer from, or what Amazon Web Services has to offer. So there is other solutions that they recognize to get it all done with. So I thought I'd point that out as well. The other thing I want to also get into is that, you know, everybody's wondering, for the most part, how can we have examples to provide a convenient way for users to enter and exit blockchain ecosystems, whether it's obviously BSV and so on, but more importantly, without sacrificing the speed and efficiency that Teranode would offer. And that brings me to the next topic. I want everybody to understand that, you know, if we're recognizing things not being counterintuitive, well, wouldn't Quant's Overledger platform incorporate something like IBAN? Well, basically, it already does. But wouldn't it facilitate interoperability between various blockchain networks and traditional financial systems? Well, the answer basically is yes. Because while BSV, as you saw from Siggy, this is not me creating FUD. It's just something he recognized. He was saying that, you know, interoperability is something that they don't necessarily need because they feel as though, kind of like a lot of you guys feel as though as well, that are BSV maxis, and I say that politely, no offense, but a lot of you guys in the comments have pointed out for years now that BSV is the one network to get it done. But in reality, my thing is this. From what I gathered, Gilbert Verdian Quant has also recognized the same vision, the same goal, and that is he recognizes TCP/IP. He recognizes that we can't have silos, we can't have walled gardens. So while I could harp all day on IBAN, the point is to facilitate interoperability between various blockchain networks and traditional systems. And basically, how is that going to work? Well, it's these four key things, and that is tokenization. As we know, with Overledger, they can tokenize real-world assets, currencies, and especially those associated with IBAN accounts into what? Digital tokens. But the process involves creating a digital representation, of course, of the actual asset and to have it represented on blockchain. But there's mapping that's required. The platform, as in the Overledger, maps the IBAN number to the corresponding digital token. Now think about this for a second. This would establish a link between the traditional financial system and, of course, the blockchain, but not in the future, right now. More importantly, back to the topic of interoperability. Once mapped, the digital token can be transferred and traded across different blockchain networks, but it would enable seamless movement of assets and payments between various systems. And of course, that brings to the next big thing, because it's the elephant in the room, and we have to mention it again. Overledger's focus on API integration. Overledger, as we know, definitely provides APIs that allow developers to interact with the platform and integrate IBAN-based transactions and, of course, into their applications. This simplifies the process of building interoperable blockchain solutions. So, at the end of the day, understand this. By incorporating IBAN into the Overledger platform, Quant aims, of course, to bridge the gap. I mean, how many times have you heard that with other projects, but they really, truly look to do that because they're blockchain agnostic. And if anything, look what's going on with R3. Look what's going on specifically when it comes to other particular things that they do. But keep in mind that it's that bridging of the gap between traditional finance and, of course, blockchain tech, enabling more efficient and secure cross-border transactions. So I mentioned a lot about interoperability, and more importantly, it's understanding that it's not a competition between the two. And a lot of people get this mixed up. A lot of people have mentioned that, look, BSV stands out with Teranode because you have that true scalability, which brings me into this. Listen to this. This is from Gilbert Verdian himself when it comes to the whole topic of blockchain at scale. Listen to this, and we'll come right back.
We all have inherited a very fragmented domestic payment system in each country. And the very nature of sovereignty has not allowed payment flows to be cross-border very easily from the outset as they were designed. So having that as a baseline, how do we integrate different domestic payment systems with each other so that you can have seamless...
Yeah, but just to be clear, is the SATP is like a technical standard, is it?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've worked with MIT and we've created within the IETF, so Internet Engineering Task Force, which is where the home of TCP/IP, HTTP, everything kind of sits within the IETF. So the SATP was approved, and that is a working group to create an RFC, a request for comment, which basically is a document for a protocol. And the whole thesis behind what needs solving is the gateway-to-gateway interconnectivity between networks. So if you treat a domestic payment system as a single network, you want to connect the UK network to the European network, to the US network, etc. The gateways are the ones that are going to do all the work between networks. And so SATP solves that problem by having the routing between gateways, the discoverability, and then the transactions between gateways. So having a globally accepted standard and a globally accepted protocol is a great way to integrate and interoperate different jurisdictions and different networks with a common language.
And that you are essentially the glue between the blockchains. You aren't so worried, I would assume, about scalability itself, because that's really up to those independent blockchains to ensure they are as scalable as possible.
Exactly, yeah. So we're not adding any more overhead to it, and what we're doing is we're respecting the rules and the speeds of each blockchain as they are. So if one blockchain has a 10 transaction a second consensus, one has 10 million, and they do their thing, and it's proof of work, proof of stake, proof of whatever. We don't care. It makes no difference for us. We're connecting to all of them and allowing people to use all of them at the same time. It's just up to the developer or the enterprise to say, well, I want to use this blockchain and this one because they suit my needs, and we just make that happen.
Makes perfect sense. Well, if we could talk about some dollars right now in terms of revenue. Obviously, every enterprise wants to make money. No doubt you do as well. You need a token potentially to do that. But let's talk about exactly what your token is for. It is unique, when we're in the crypto space, and let's find out why. Because obviously you're not a typical crypto. So can you tell us why that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're not a coin. We're not minting a new coin for people to trade and buy stuff and that sort of thing. So what we are, so the Quant token is it's a utility token, and we've done this at a very high standard. We've partnered with KPMG, so we've engaged them in Switzerland. They've done all our regulatory, legal, tax, everything with the regulator and everything in. So
you're very legit.
More than that, yeah, absolutely. We're doing everything at a very high professional standard. That's just our backgrounds. We wouldn't do it any other way.
Sure.
So we make a token where it's a security or a payment token, and it's not a hybrid token. So Quant is the QNT token is actually a utility, and what we mean by that is it's an access token. So you need Quant tokens to access Overledger and the network behind it, and also to run the maps. And if you think about it, we're not inventing something new here. This is pretty much the same as Apple with their iPhone. You pay them £1,000 and you buy an iPhone, but what you're getting with that iPhone is some keys, and the Quant token is exactly the same. You're getting the keys to access the App Store, which is what Apple are doing, and we're allowing people to run maps and access the network similar to the way Apple does it, because tokens are just PKI. They're just encryption keys, and we're using the background in security to do that. And we have a bigger use for these for Quant token. It's not just to run maps, and it's not to access the network, but it's also to be able to connect. And one of the roadmaps that we've got is we want to connect the internet to blockchain, and that's a powerful statement. And if you really think about it, you can't do that today. You can't really connect from the traditional internet to the blockchain, which we're calling the Internet of Trust,
right?
Easily. You have to come and go through servers and connect into the distributed network and whatever. So the Quant tokens are a vehicle in order to be able to connect these two mega networks together, and they have a bigger purpose that's in our roadmap coming up.
I see. So they're a key access utility.
I thought it was worth pointing some of this out. BSV definitely stands out to me when it comes to the whole topic of scalability. People will point out before, like, yeah, they're a true layer 1 with scalability, right? But when you hear things of interoperability between various different blockchains, no matter what the layer is a different type of solution. Is Gilbert Verdian recognizing that? I think he is. But more importantly, is understanding that they have different use cases, but both have a common goal. And check this out. This is also good for your understanding. I want you guys to understand that when we get more into the weeds of this, there's so much to really get into because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So we talked about scalability, and people have pointed out, whether they're BSV maxis or people that just want to look at Quant as being an ERC20 token and nothing else. Again, back to what you saw from Gilbert Verdian. I mean, it's just a utility token that gives you access to all of the other products, right? I love that analogy he used in regards to like how Apple's set up. But Quant's overledger is truly blockchain agnostic, does definitely allow for interoperability at scale with any blockchain, and it can connect to this thing called the M10 for 1 million TPS. Now, back to what I was stating before. Is that going to be enough to get it done, especially when it comes to like the banking sectors and so on? Or is BSV, for what they're going to do for the future, even that much more impressive? Well, my answer is this. Who says you can't own both? Is there any law written that says that you can't own both? I am diversified. I choose to own both, but I get it. Some people are just going to, own one. But Terranode's Siggy Oscarsson, like he said in that London Blockchain 2024 conference, that all you need is one blockchain and that all you need is to get rid of the interoperability thing. That's his quote, not mine. He says, all you need is a basic protocol, suggesting that all you need is BSV blockchain. With that said, here's my question for everybody. It's a rhetorical question. If Terranode is suggesting that you don't need a bunch of blockchains and that all you need is one, and Quant is blockchain agnostic and allows interoperability through the overledger, then what is the key difference between, of course, Terranode and Quant's overledger if both mention what? Interoperability. And here's the answer. Basically, the key difference is what lies in their approaches to blockchain scalability and, of course, interoperability. Let's start off with Terranode. Okay, I know this is becoming quite the deep dive, but I got a lot of requests to do this, and that it is what it is. I'm okay with it. So Terranode, from my own research, is single blockchain approach. Okay, they believe that a single highly scalable blockchain, obviously BSV, is sufficient for all needs. They focus on throughput. They prioritize in achieving extremely high transaction speeds. obviously well over 1 million TPS, and in the future, probably over 100 million TPS. My God, that has to have some value because that's unique. And last I checked, anything that's extremely unique, that is innovative, bet on that, right? Absolutely. So it's the simplistic approach that they have. They advocate for a basic foundational protocol rather than a complex interoperability solution. Okay. And that's no fun on my beloved quant, but that's the way you look at it. All right. Back to the whole thing about Overledger with quant. Their blockchain agnostic approach, excuse me, it can connect and interact with multiple different blockchain networks, basically anything. And if it's not on the list, what they stated, they'll make it interoperable. It is no longer 3 lines of code. It's no lines of code. And if you don't believe me, go to make.com, and also as of recently, go to Zapier. Interoperability focus. Yes, that is their focus. They prioritize enabling seamless communication and data between various different blockchains. But when we get back to the topic of scalability, it's through multiple chains. They leverage, again, keep in mind, leverage back to what Gilbert Verdian said, because he said in some cases, maybe you're just that guy who's an accountant, you only need 10 TPS. I mean, I know it seems like, geez, that's ridiculously small, but I mean, again, for those specific businesses, and maybe that's all they want to do. At the end of the day, those are the enterprises that are going to, say, hey, look, this is what we know, and this is what we want to go with. So leveraging the combined capacity of multiple blockchains, and of course to achieve high overall throughput. That's where it's at. Now, there's key differences. I know this is getting a little bit more into the weeds of things, but I want people to understand that the number of blockchains, right? So Terranode uses a single blockchain, while Quant's Overledger uses the support for multiple. Focus. Terranode emphasizes high throughput on a single chain. And I'm not shooting that down. But Quant's Overledger focuses on interoperability between multiple chains. Excuse me. It's the approach, though. Terranode advocates for simplicity and a foundational protocol. Obviously, the original one, the original Bitcoin. And that in itself is bullish as all hell. Don't misinterpret what I'm saying like that's a bad thing, because it really isn't a bad thing at all. Because when you really look into it, again, back to the whole thing of what one of these so-called Bitcoins is the original Bitcoin. I mean, you look at Bitcoin Cash, that doesn't seem like it's doing it. You look at Bitcoin ABC, which is now called, eCash, right? It's like, that's not really doing it, right? And you look at some of these other ones, it just doesn't seem like there's so much crippling, on the TPS and whatnot. And, I will agree with Satoshi, the whole thing with SegWit. I mean, my God, what a disaster, right? So, again, when we understand the approach, well, Terranode advocates for simplicity and a foundational protocol, but again, Overledger through Quant provides a more complex solution for, of course, interoperability. In summary, I know that's a lot to take in, but Terranode is a single blockchain solution focused, of course, on high throughput. Quant's Overledger is a multi-blockchain solution, of course, focused on, obviously, interoperability. The choice between these two approaches depends on the specific needs and application or use case. Back to what Gilbert Verdian literally said in that old video from a few years ago, because it's valid. So if high throughput on a single chain or blockchain is the primary requirement, Terranode obviously is more than suitable for that. However, interoperability with multiple blockchains is essential. Then I got to give Quant Overledger as the win on that one. But again, I recognize what stands out for both moving forward. Both have terrific tokenomics. I mean, what is it? 21 million on the real Bitcoin, BSV, and of course, Quant, QNT, 14.88 million max tokens. I get it. One's a coin, one's a token. Okay? And I do believe that BSV will be the most expensive coin in history, not token. I'm going with QNT on that one. And I am still sticking to my guns about that. All right. So here's another thing I need to get into as well. Okay. And maybe I'm wearing you guys out with this, but I don't see a lot of people get into the weeds about that. And I don't know. I'm cool with that. So is Terranode exclusive? Shout out to Jack. Yes, that's right. Shout out to our brother Jack. Okay. Because Jack, if you're listening, you stated to me, hey man, is Terranode exclusive to BSV blockchain, or can it work with other blockchains outside of BSV? I decided to look more into this. So as of now, Terranode is primarily designed to work with the Bitcoin SV BSV blockchain. That's what separates this thing from others. It's like it's an overlay. Overledger is an overlay. Terranode is an overlay. There's a lot of familiar things, but again, as of now, it's primarily designed to work, of course, with BSV. But you better believe it's a significant upgrade in regards to the BSV node software, and it's specifically tailored to address scaling challenges and, of course, enhance the network's capabilities. Now, from what I also gathered, while there's no official confirmation of Terranode being compatible with other blockchains outside of BSV, it is possible, let's face it, that its underlying principles or components, like its tech basically, could be adapted and applied to other blockchains in the near future. I don't know if that's something that's ever going to happen. And maybe it never does. Maybe that's just what keeps BSV or the real Bitcoin unique, right? But this would likely require, of course, significant modification developments. But I mean, I don't really see that happening personally. But that's what I gathered. The other thing I also gathered is, some other key things, and that is Terranode, of course, claims that banks can use it to scale, as we saw kind of like, what you saw from that panel at the London conference. So which banks are currently partnered with BSV blockchain to incorporate Terranode's technology, of course, to scale? Some people are asking that. Well, from what I gather, as of now, there's no publicly available information indicating that any banks have officially partnered with BSV blockchain to incorporate Terranode's technology for scaling purposes. But that doesn't mean that there's not NDAs, and that's definitely worth pointing out as well. But again, when you hear statements, especially from Aerospike, recognizing the scalability and that they already have clients that they can do 300 million TPS for, and they mentioned that it's just a matter of time before these guys, like you said, at BSV for Terranode can do that scalability of 100 million plus TPS. You better believe that somebody's going to get whiff of it from a major financial institution and say, my God. And that in itself creates tremendous supply and demand for our beloved BSV. Moving forward, is it very well possible that, we could see like a technical or regulatory challenge that might be addressed before large scale adoption? Yeah, we could. But here's the other thing I want to mention, and that is back to the whole thing of, because, we are doing a compare and a contrast, a quant, and people stating, well, forget what Gilbert Verdian mentioned in regards to, not so much focus on the scalability, it's leveraging scalability of the existing blockchains, right, through interoperability. But I pointed out in the past, and other researchers have as well, is of course back to the whole thing of the M10. The M10 is a real thing. So can the M10 truly scale higher than 1 million TPS for banks? I mean, in the future, is that going to be a necessity? Is that going to be a thing that really needs to be done, especially recognizing that, wow, BSV, Bitcoin Association, could just leave everybody in the dust? Maybe that's the whole point. So can we see it scale higher than 1 million TPS for banks? Well, understand this. The M10 definitely has high performance server from, that's going to get it done for all the banks for the most part, especially with interoperability with the overledger. But it has the potential to scale way beyond 1 million TPS. And again, for banking solutions, that might just more than do it. But you got to keep in mind, there's factors that affect, of course, even its TPS capacity. And I just want to state this before we go forward, and that is, I don't think it's going to do what Terranode's going to do, but it's worth pointing out that with the proper hardware configuration, again, from what I've gathered just with my brief deep dive, maybe it's not brief at this point, there's a number of CPUs, more CPUs, kind of like you saw in those examples from what those guys mentioned in the panel, can definitely handle more concurrent transactions. That in itself is not exclusive just to BSV with Terranode. Terranode in itself, I understand it's an exclusive technology, but again, understanding that with the M10, if you look into it, they're going to be able to scale up. But again, I don't think they're going to be able to do it with like at the scale that Terranode will do. But again, more memory, again, super servers, if you want to call it that, part of the quantum financial system. More than enough adequate memory would be crucial for data caching, reduced disk I/O, of course, storage, high performance, storage systems like NVMe. If you guys are nerds, have solid state drives that can significantly improve transaction speeds. I mean, heck, some of you guys are gamers. You have like M2s on your board. I don't know. I'm getting really into the nerd space right now. I understand, but again, networking, low latency, high bandwidth networking, obviously is essential for efficient communication, of course, between the components. But again, there's so much stuff that would cause scalability, right? Whether it's horizontal, vertical scaling, hybrid scaling. But my thing is this, okay? Let's get out of the tech talk because I gone way too far into this stuff. Real world examples is where it's going to be for all of us to easily understand all this. While specific performance benchmarks for the M10 in banking environments basically are limited, there are numerous examples of other high performance servers achieving similar levels of TPS. Obviously, there's Terranode, but we're talking about the M10. So some banks have reported achieving already millions of TPS using custom-built systems or specialized hardware accelerators. Again, back to the example of what you saw from the gentleman that represented Amazon Web Services. Because, in conclusion, the M10, you better believe it, if you were to nerd it out and do your own deep dive, they have the capability to scale to a high TPS farther than a million. Again, I don't know if they're going to reach 10 million or 100 million TPS, but would it be more than adequate for banking applications moving forward? Could very well be. But achieving this performance requires careful consideration of hardware configuration, software optimization, workload characteristics, and that, of course, leads me to the topic at the beginning. And that is what? IBAN. I mean, if you have all this crazy TPS and then it just, you have this mechanism that is going to not be 1 million TPS because it's verifying all these things, then that kind of seems like it's counterintuitive, or you're shooting yourself in the foot in regards to the whole thing of 1 million plus TPS. So while I want everybody to understand some of these key things, here's again the last three things, I should say. And it's the technology. As we see on the screen, when you get more into this, I'll put this branding up instead, or take that off. M10, if you weren't aware of it, they were definitely designed to allow central banks and commercial banks to be quickly integrated in one of two ways. The bank consumes the M10 APIs. Obviously, Quant is API everything, and we had numerous examples of them working with the central banks, Bank of International Settlements, especially Bank of England. But the M10 consumes the bank's APIs. As we've seen in numerous deep dives I've done with you guys for almost 3 years now, how many examples have we had in regards to the banking side of APIs? Now, there's no part of the M10 cloud that runs at the bank, but keep in mind for API details, you will see in the documents, they will support more of that if you want to go down that rabbit hole. M10 consumes a bank's APIs. They need access to the following functions. They need a link with existing legacy accounts. We already have that with the overledger. And there needs to be a transfer of funds between internal accounts. We've already seen more of those examples through the overledger. And of course, they need to retrieve a balance of legacy accounts. Again, go to Make, go to Zapier, use the overledger if you know how to do this, and you can see those examples for yourself. But there's more than enough examples. Let's get into the next part. All right. And maybe people don't want me mentioning this, but I need to mention it because there's a false narrative out there. And this is not FUD because I hold both. A lot of you guys hold both. Some of you guys might just hold one or the other. But there is a narrative out there that BSV is the holy saint of this whole thing, and they would never get involved with central bank digital currencies. Let's address that, okay? So, first thing is to talk about this for just a brief moment. Let's also take off the other part of the branding. Sorry about that. And that is, I mentioned this before. Are CBDCs good or bad? Like most technology, they are a double-edged sword. True. They're also multifaceted, having financial, political, and technological implications. On the positive side, CBDCs will enable programmable money. You obviously see that with Quant through the Overledger, meaning welfare payments can be programmed so they can only be spent and used for their intended purpose. They'll also usher in greater financial transparency, making it easier for law enforcement to detect and clamp down on the crime. If you go to Quant Network, they don't mention that they are full-fledged CBDC. It mentions that it's kind of like a medium CBDC. You guys may want to agree with that or not, but it is a thing. The negatives, of course, of CBDCs, we know about this for the most part, but if you're new to this, I thought I would share this. The negatives of CBDCs cannot be ignored. Liberty advocates, which a lot of people feel as though that Bitcoin is true freedom. How many times have you heard that? So liberty advocates worry about financial surveillance straight out of the book 1984. I read the book. A lot of you guys have read that book. Great book. You know, my friend's got a thing on Facebook. It says, make Orwell fiction again. Well, it's not happening, right? But the ability for governments to freeze wallets and confiscate funds and basically like do crazy things for political rivals, but the general loss of privacy that comes with using paper money and coins. Well, central banks have noted the public's concerns about CBDCs and tried to reassure them. And some people feel as though, yeah, they try to assure a lot of things until they take everything away, and that's true. But the German Bundesbank recently clarified that CBDCs would protect citizens' privacy. I mean, do you believe this? A lot of people don't. And that would not replace other payment methods such as credit cards and cash. However, CBDCs, critics are still skeptical. And keep in mind, if you're wondering where this link comes from, it comes from CoinGeek. And as we know, CoinGeek, you know, they share a ton of BSV info every day, just about. And the name of the article is called More Central Banks Exploring CBDCs, the number of pilots increases. So central banks have noted the public's concerns about CBDCs and tried to reassure them. I already read that part. Critics are skeptical, but there's an alternative middle way, and it does mention BSV. So look at this. It says here, CBDCs aren't a problem in and of themselves, but the central bank control ledgers is what they run on that spook people. Central banks running the nodes will give them virtually unchecked power. Some people say, yeah, this, you know, get more into Augustine Carson's. He's mentioned this. True, to a sense. But look, since CBDCs seem inevitable, a proposed middle way is to issue them on a scalable public blockchains like BSV. Being a proof of work blockchain, no group of central banks could have complete control over the network. Other nodes run by private interests could veto any moves viewed as illegal, and network rules balancing the needs of both CBDC issuers and users could be agreed on and enforced by all. Since the nodes on a proof of work blockchain require vast quantities of electricity, it's impossible for them to remain anonymous. Everyone could verify who's running the nodes, and thus they would be both subject to legal orders in their jurisdictions. They could also freeze funds in case of an actual crime, where everyone could verify who they are, meaning entities like North Korea or the CIA could not take over the network using Sybil attacks. And of course, you're more than welcome to look more into that if you choose to do so. But issuing CBDCs on a scalable utility blockchain like BSV is the middle way. All of the efficiency and transparency of peer-to-peer payments with instant settlement can be realized. While at the same time, concerns about government control and loss of privacy can be basically, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with this statement, but you know, some people feel as though that, yeah, you see loss of control and loss, but loss in regards to privacy, excuse me. But then again, perhaps that's not what the powers want. It's up to the people to petition them and convince them that the CBDCs are only accessible if the ledgers they run are on a distributed and out of the control of any single or tightly knit group of entities. It's all about trust, and BSV was designed to enable that. Okay, back to what Gilbert Verdian was talking about the internet trust. So there's similar goals between the two, and that's another thing I definitely wanted to point out. All right, last statement, and again, straight from Gilbert Verdian. Great to see the industry finally maturing to recognize the need for interoperability. Why should we limit commerce by creating silos, walled gardens, and single chain assets that can only transact with participants on one network? Again, understand the statements made from, the gentleman over at Terranode, but he refers to one network. Some people feel as though that's the only network that's going to survive. Again, I understand that. And again, I don't want to just buy one particular token. I don't want to buy one particular coin. And if anything, I don't want to join one club for anything. I'm an investor. I want to be diversified. So he says, we saw the risk and insecurity of the core internet and the foundation technologies underpinning it in 1997. The core architecture was designed in the 1950s without embedding effective security and protocols and internet technologies, which has led to all the cybersecurity risks and issues we face today. The lack of blockchain interoperability 10 years ago in 2013, and have seen many attempts to try to tackle interoperability while established ISO standards in 2016 and IETF protocols in 2022, with collaboration with peers working together to facilitate adoption and evolution, similar to how the internet technologies evolved, of course, to today. So, for a lot of people that don't follow this, you have to keep in mind, like he says, they built the enterprise-grade technology back in 2018, referring to Quant, and solved the challenges of interoperability for enterprise, institutions, and, of course, government. With blockchain and security technology and features, we can finally solve the challenges of an insecure internet and create something even better. So I wanted to share all this with you guys because, there's so many people out there that maybe you just haven't really done the research and realized that, yes, both boast things and talk about like interoperability, but I think you got to understand that they both have a common goal and they both obviously have individual goals. So again, are you going to own one? Are you going to own both? Let me know in the comments. I would like to hear from you guys. Not often I do a compare and contrast in regards to two particular tokens. And again, it's not set up for, the goal of tribalism or anything like that. That'd be ridiculous. I don't really do that on this channel. But thought I would share it with you guys. If you listen to the entire outline, simply do me a favor and type into the comments this one key thing. And that is trust. And I'll know that you have listened to the outline. I really appreciate everybody that listens to these deep dives. And if anything, I hope you all have a blessed rest of your day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.